Karen Whitmore stood in her perfectly manicured backyard, clutching her morning coffee mug so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Where yesterday there had been a sparkling blue swimming pool, the crown jewel of 47 Maple Grove Lane now sat nothing but a gaping rectangular hole in the earth, filled with dirt and freshly planted grass seed. "What the hell happened to my pool?" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire Willowbrook Heights subdivision like a fire siren at 3 in the morning. Her neighbor, Marcus Chen, looked up from his own backyard where he was watering his prize-winning roses. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth as he watched Karen's meltdown unfold. After 18 months of her children treating his property like their personal playground, he'd finally had enough. "Oh, hey, Karen," Marcus called out, his tone deliberately casual. "I had it removed yesterday. Professional pool removal service. They were very efficient." Karen's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against her designer patio stones. "You can't just remove a pool. That's destruction of property. That's vandalism." "Actually, it was my pool," Marcus replied, continuing to water his flowers on my property. "Check your property lines again, Karen. I think you'll find that pool was about 3 feet onto my side of the fence." The color drained from Karen's face. As the self-appointed president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, she prided herself on knowing every rule, every regulation, every property boundary in their exclusive community. How could she have missed this? "That's impossible," she sputtered. "I've lived here for 15 years. That pool has been there since before you moved in." Marcus finally turned to face her fully, setting down his watering can. 23 years. Actually, the previous owners built it in 2001. I have the original survey documents, the building permits, and the property assessment records. Would you like to see them?" Karen's mind raced. Her twins, Jaden and Braylon, had been using that pool every single day for the past 3 summers. Hell, half the neighborhood kids had been using it. She'd thrown pool parties, hosted HOA meetings on the pool deck, even charged admission to neighbors for exclusive pool access to raise funds for new subdivision signage. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "No one removes a perfectly good pool. Do you have any idea what that cost?" "About $12,000, Marcus said matter-of-factly. "Worth every penny for some peace and quiet." This was war, and Karen Whitmore didn't lose wars. She stormed back into her house, nearly knocking over her husband Dale, who was heading out for his morning jog. Dale had learned long ago to stay out of Karen's neighborhood feuds, but the look on her face made him pause. "What's wrong now?" he asked, adjusting his running shorts. "Marcus Chen destroyed our pool," Karen snapped, grabbing her phone from the kitchen counter. "Our pool. Honey, that pool was never." "Don't start with me, Dale." Karen's fingers flew across her phone screen. "I'm calling the police. This is criminal destruction of property." Dale sighed and headed for the door. After 20 years of marriage, he knew better than to argue with Karen when she was in full battle mode. He'd learned to pick his battles, and this wasn't one he could win. Karen dialed 911, pacing back and forth across her imported marble kitchen floor. "Yes. Hello. I need to report a crime in progress. Someone has destroyed my swimming pool." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "Ma'am, did you say someone destroyed your swimming pool?" "Yes. My neighbor had it filled in and removed. This is destruction of property worth at least $50,000, and this pool was on your property." Karen hesitated for just a moment. "Well, it's complicated. But I've been using it for years. Squatters' rights. Adverse possession, ma'am. I'm going to send an officer to take a report, but property disputes are generally civil matters. You might want to contact a lawyer. I want him arrested. This is criminal." 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez pulled up in front of the Chen residence. Karen was already waiting on the sidewalk, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She'd changed into her most authoritative outfit, a navy blazer with her HOA president pin prominently displayed, pressed khakis, and sensible flats that clicked ominously against pavement. "Officer, thank God you're here," Karen began before Rodriguez had even gotten out of his patrol car. "That man," she pointed dramatically at Marcus's house, "has committed a crime against the entire neighborhood. He's destroyed community property." Officer Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd dealt with his share of neighborhood disputes, pulled out his notepad with the resigned expression of someone who knew this call was about to get very complicated. "Let's start from the beginning, ma'am. What exactly happened here?" Marcus emerged from his front door, carrying a manila folder thick with documents. He'd been expecting this conversation. "Good morning, officer," Marcus said calmly. "I'm Marcus Chen. I believe Mrs. Whitmore called you about the pool I had removed from my property yesterday." "Your property?" Karen's voice pitched higher. "That pool has been there for decades. My children have been swimming in it every day. The entire neighborhood uses it. With permission," Marcus added, "which I've now revoked." Officer Rodriguez looked between the two homeowners, already sensing where this was heading. "Mr. Chen, do you have documentation showing this pool was on your property?" Marcus opened his folder and handed over a stack of papers. "Original survey from 1998 when I purchased the house, updated survey from 2019, Property tax records showing I've been paying taxes on that portion of the land. And the original building permits from 2001. Karen watched in growing horror as Officer Rodriguez reviewed the documents. Her mental map of the neighborhood was reorganizing itself, and she didn't like what she was seeing. Mrs. Whitmore, Officer Rodriguez said finally, based on these documents, it appears the pool was indeed on Mr. Chen's property. He had every right to remove it. But what about all the money I've spent on pool maintenance? Karen demanded. The cleaning chemicals, the pool cover, the decorative lighting I installed? Did Mr. Chen ask you to maintain his pool? Rodriguez asked. Well, no. But did you have any written agreement about pool usage or maintenance responsibilities? Karen's face flushed red. It was understood. Neighbors help neighbors. This is a community. Marcus spoke up quietly. Officer, I'd like to point out that Mrs. Whitmore has been charging other neighbors for pool access without my knowledge or consent. She's been running what amounts to a small business using my property. The implications hit Karen like a slap. Not only had she lost access to the pool, but now she might owe refunds to every neighbor who'd paid her pool membership fees over the past 3 years. You can't prove that, she said quickly. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Officer Rodriguez a screenshot. This is from the neighborhood Facebook page. Mrs. Whitmore's post from last month. Pool passes available for remainder of summer. Season, $50 per family. Message me for details. Officer Rodriguez looked at Karen with new interest. Ma'am, were you charging people to use someone else's property? It was for maintenance costs, Karen protested, and community improvement funds, without the property owner's knowledge or consent. The legal ramifications were starting to dawn on Karen. She could face charges for theft, fraud, maybe even operating an unlicensed business. Her mind raced through possibilities, searching for an angle, a loophole, anything to turn this situation around. I want to file a complaint against Mr. Chen for emotional distress, she announced suddenly. My children are traumatized. They don't understand why their pool is gone. This is causing psychological damage to minors. Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad. Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you contact a civil attorney if you want to pursue this. Further, Mr. Chen has broken no laws by removing a structure from his own property. However, if you've been collecting money for access to property you don't own, that could be a different matter entirely. As Officer Rodriguez drove away, Karen stood on the sidewalk, her mind spinning with rage and desperate calculations. She'd built her entire identity around being the queen of Willowbrook Heights, the woman who knew everyone's business and controlled every aspect of neighborhood life. Marcus Chen had just challenged that authority in the most public way possible, but Karen Whitmore hadn't clawed her way to the top of 3 different HOAs by backing down from a fight. If Marcus wanted war, she'd give him war. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts. As HOA president, she had connections, city council members, building inspectors, code enforcement officers. There had to be dozens of violations on Marcus's property. Nobody was perfect, and she was going to find every single flaw, every overlooked permit, every blade of grass that was a millimeter too tall. Marcus Chen has no idea who he's dealing with, she muttered to herself, already composing the first of what would be many official complaints. Behind his living room window, Marcus watched Karen pace on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly as she spoke to whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end of the call. He'd known this wouldn't end with the pool removal. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, but he'd been preparing for this moment for months. Every document was in order, every permit was current, every inch of his prop. 3 days after the great pool vanishing, Karen Whitmore sat in her home office surrounded by printouts, highlighted codebooks, and a growing stack of official complaint forms. She'd transformed her usual HOA command center into something resembling a war room, complete with a neighborhood map marked with colored pins indicating potential violations. The doorbell rang, interrupting her research into residential fence height ordinances. Section 12.4.7. I'll get it, called her daughter Braylon from upstairs, but Karen was already at the door. She'd been expecting this visit. Inspector Williams from the city's code enforcement division stood on her doorstep, clipboard in hand, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him, Marcus Chen stood with his arms crossed, a satisfied smile on his face. Mrs. Whitmore, Inspector Williams consulted his paperwork. I'm here about the complaint filed against your property. Multiple alleged violations. Karen's confident expression faltered. My property, there must be some mistake. I called about my neighbor's violations, and I called about yours, Marcus said pleasantly. Turns out when you file anonymous complaints, people can file them right back. Inspector Williams cleared his throat. Ma'am, I have reports of an unpermitted deck extension, illegal subletting of a residential property for business purposes, and a possible septic system violation. May I come in? Karen's mind reeled. How had Marcus found out about any of those things? The deck extension was barely 50 square feet. Added 3 years ago when she'd decided the existing deck wasn't impressive enough for her garden parties. The subletting was just renting out the basement apartment to help cover the mortgage. And the septic thing was ... Oh God, the septic thing. Of course, Karen said, stepping aside with as much dignity as she could manage. Though I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. As Inspector Williams began his examination, starting with the unpermitted deck, Karen followed him around like a nervous shadow. Marcus, uninvited but apparently unconcerned about social niceties, trailed behind them. When was this addition? Maid Williams asked, measuring the deck extension. It's been there for years, Karen said, evasively. Williams consulted his tablet. According to county records, your last permitted construction was in 2018. This section appears to be newer. It's possible it was ... updated ... More recently, a repair. Really, not new construction. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Williams a photo. This is from Google Earth, dated last year. You can clearly see the deck ends here, he pointed. And this is from last month, showing the extension. Karen stared at Marcus in shock. He'd been planning this, documenting everything, waiting. How do you have pictures of my backyard? She demanded. Public satellite imagery, Marcus replied. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Inspector Williams made notes on his tablet. Mrs. Whitmore, this extension will need to be permitted retroactively or removed. The filing fee for retroactive permits includes a penalty. They moved inside, where Williams immediately spotted the separate entrance to the basement apartment. Karen's stomach dropped. You mentioned possible illegal subletting, Williams asked Marcus. Check Airbnb and VRBO, Marcus suggested. Search for a charming garden apartment in exclusive Willowbrook Heights. Karen's face went pale. She'd been so careful to use vague descriptions, never mentioning the address directly. How had he found her listings? Williams pulled up the listings on his phone. 5-star rated, over 200 reviews. ... Mrs. Whitmore, do you have a business license for operating a short-term rental? It's just occasionally helping out travelers, Karen protested, neighbors being neighborly, at $150 a night, with professional photos and a detailed amenities list. Marcus added helpfully. Williams continued his inspection, finding code violations Karen hadn't even known existed. The basement apartment's ceiling was 3 inches too low. The electrical panel had been modified without permits. The secondary bathroom had been added without proper inspections. But the worst was yet to come. Now about the septic system, Williams said, consulting his clipboard. I have a report that wastewater from your property may be affecting neighboring properties. Karen's blood ran cold. Last month, during a particularly busy week with 5 different Airbnb guests using the basement apartment, there had been some backup issues. She'd hired a guy to fix it quickly and quietly. Cash payment, no receipts, no questions asked. I don't know what you mean, she said weakly. Marcus gestured toward his yard. Inspector, you might want to check the area near the property line. There's been some unusual vegetation growth, and a distinct odor during warm weather. Williams walked to the backyard, and Karen watched in horror as he began taking photos of a suspiciously green patch of grass along the fence line. The area where her cut-rate septic repair had involved redirecting overflow toward what the handyman had assured her was just unused land. Mrs. Whitmore, this appears to be raw sewage contamination, Williams said grimly. This is a serious health hazard. I'm issuing an immediate cease and desist order for your rental operation, and you'll need to have your septic system professionally inspected and repaired within 48 hours. Karen sank into a patio chair, the full scope of her situation finally hitting her. The fines alone would cost thousands. The septic repair could run into 5 figures. And if word got out that she'd been operating an illegal business while contaminating the neighbor's property? How did you know? She asked Marcus quietly. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression softening slightly. Karen, you've been running roughshod over this neighborhood for years. Charging people to use my pool was just the latest in a long line of schemes. Did you really think no one was paying attention? I was trying to improve the community, Karen said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. By operating an illegal business? By contaminating my property with sewage? By taking money for services you had no right to provide? Inspector Williams finished his documentation and handed Karen a thick stack of citations and notices. Ma'am, you have 30 days to address the unpermitted construction, 48 hours for the septic system, and the rental operation must cease immediately. Total fines as of today are $4,200, but that will increase daily until violations are corrected. After Williams and Marcus left, Karen sat alone in her backyard, staring at the notices. Dale wouldn't be home for hours. He was at another one of his mysterious business trips that she'd stopped questioning years ago. The kids were at school. For the first time in years, Karen Whitmore felt truly alone. But as the shock wore off, anger began to take its place. Marcus Chen had been watching her, documenting her every move, building a case against her while pretending to be a good neighbor. The betrayal was complete, and Karen didn't handle betrayal well. She pulled out her phone and called her most reliable ally, Janet Kowalski, the neighborhood gossip queen and Karen's loyal lieutenant in the HOA. Janet, it's Karen, we have a situation. Marcus Chen has declared war on the entire neighborhood, and we need to respond accordingly. What do you mean war? Janet's voice was eager. She lived for drama. He's trying to destroy property values by creating conflict. He's filed false reports with the city. He's attempting to undermine the HOA's authority. And Janet, I think he might be racist. The word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Karen knew it was a lie, but she also knew it was effective. In their predominantly white upper-middle-class neighborhood, accusations of racism were taken very seriously when they came from the HOA president. Oh my God, Karen, are you sure? Think about it, Janet. He moved into our community and immediately began challenging our established traditions. He removed a pool that children had been using for years without any warning or discussion. He's trying to drive down property values to force longtime residents to sell. It's a pattern. Karen could practically hear Janet's mind racing. Janet's husband had lost his job 6 months ago, and they were struggling with their mortgage. The idea that someone might be deliberately trying to damage property values would resonate with her perfectly. What do we do? Janet asked. Emergency HOA meeting. Tomorrow night. I'm calling it under Article 7 of our bylaws, threat to community safety and property values. We need to document Marcus Chen's pattern of hostile behavior before he does any more damage. After hanging up with Janet, Karen spent the rest of the day making calls. By evening, she'd spoken to 16 of the neighborhood's 23 households. Her message was carefully crafted. Marcus Chen was a threat to their community, their property values, and their way of life. She didn't mention the pool had been on his property. She didn't mention her own code violations. And she certainly didn't mention the sewage contamination. Instead, she painted a picture of a vindictive neighbor who was using legal technicalities to harass a longtime resident and community leader. She emphasized her years of service to the neighborhood, the pool parties she'd hosted for everyone's children, the improvements she'd made to common areas. By the time she finished her calls, Karen had almost convinced herself that she was the victim in this situation. The next evening, Karen's living room was packed with neighbors. She'd arranged the furniture to create an informal town hall atmosphere, with herself positioned at the front of the room, like a judge presiding over Marcus Chen had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant, specializing in corporate fraud investigations. He'd unraveled Ponzi schemes, exposed embezzlement rings, and tracked money through labyrinthian offshore accounts. Investigating Karen Whitmore's neighborhood schemes was almost insulting in its simplicity. He started with public records. Sitting in his home office at 5:30 a.m. with his first cup of coffee, Marcus pulled up the county assessor's website and began tracing the financial history of every HOA transaction Karen had overseen in the past 5 years. As president, she had access to all community funds, and Marcus had a feeling that access hadn't been used entirely appropriately. What he found made him smile grimly. The HOA's official account showed regular deposits from homeowner dues. But there were also dozens of unusual transactions, community improvement fees that didn't correspond to any actual improvements, special assessments that had been voted on in meetings with suspiciously low attendance, and most interesting of all, a series of payments to Whitmore Property Management Services, a company that, according to state business records, had been incorporated by one Karen Elizabeth Whitmore 3 years ago. Karen had been paying herself to manage the HOA. Marcus printed out the bank statements and cross-referenced them with meeting minutes from the HO Neighborhood Facebook page. Pattern after pattern emerged. Karen would call emergency meetings on short notice, usually when most neighbors couldn't attend. She'd rush through votes on new fees and assessments. And then, mysteriously, those funds would end up in her personal business account. But the HOA financial irregularities were just the beginning. Marcus's next stop was the city planning department, where he'd filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all permits, variances, and code enforcement actions in Willowbrook Heights over the past 5 years. The clerk, a pleasant woman named Dorothy who remembered Marcus from his previous visits, had the files ready. Quite a bit of activity on Maple Grove Lane, Dorothy commented as she handed over the thick folder. Your neighbor keeps us busy. Karen Whitmore. Oh yes, she's filed complaints against. Let me see. Dorothy consulted her computer. 17 different properties in the past 2 years. But here's the interesting part. Most of them were dismissed as frivolous or withdrawn before investigation. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Withdrawn usually happens when the complainant reaches some kind of private agreement with the property owner, quite common in HOA disputes. Actually, Marcus thanked Dorothy and took the files to a nearby coffee shop to review them. What he found was a comprehensive record of Karen's intimidation tactics. She'd file code enforcement complaints against neighbors, then approach them privately to resolve the issue, usually involving some kind of payment or concession to the HOA. Mrs. Patterson had been cited for an improperly maintained lawn. Her grass was 1 inch taller than the HOA guidelines. The complaint was withdrawn after she agreed to pay for new landscaping in the common areas. The Hendersons had been reported for unauthorized exterior modifications. They'd painted their shutters a slightly different shade of green. That complaint disappeared after they donated $500 to the Community Beautification Fund. Jim Morrison had faced citations for 3 different violations until he agreed to serve as HOA treasurer, position that Marcus noted gave Karen complete access to financial records and signatures. It was extortion. Plain and simple. Karen had weaponized the city's code enforcement system to shake down her neighbors. But Marcus's most interesting discovery came when he cross-referenced the code enforcement files with property transfer records. Every single neighbor who'd been targeted by Karen's complaints had eventually sold their house and moved away. The average time between first complaint and property sale was 14 months. Karen wasn't just collecting fees and donations, she was systematically driving out residents she didn't like, allowing her to handpick new neighbors who would be more compliant with her vision of community leadership. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his former colleague, Rita Vasquez, who now worked as a private investigator in the city. "Rita, it's Marcus. I have a situation that might require your particular expertise. Retirement getting boring?" Rita's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Let me guess, neighbor problems." "Neighbor problems with a paper trail. I need someone who can dig deeper into financial records than I can access as a civilian." "Sounds intriguing. What are we talking about here?" Marcus outlined Karen's schemes: the HOA financial irregularities, the systematic harassment of neighbors, the pattern of forced property sales. "Marcus, this sounds like a RICO case waiting to happen," Rita said when he finished. "Racketeering, extortion, possibly mail fraud if she's been sending official notices for fake violations. How far do you want to take this?" "As far as necessary. She's declared war on me, Rita. I need to know everything she's been doing, and I need proof that will hold up in court. Give me a weekend, Marcus. This is going to get expensive. Money's not an issue. Just find the truth." While Rita began her investigation, Marcus decided to take a more direct approach with his neighbors. If Karen was going to spread lies about him, he'd counter with facts about her. He started with Dr. Sarah Kim, who'd already proven herself willing to stand up to Karen's "Sarah, I need to ask you something confidential," Marcus said when she answered her door. "In your professional opinion, if someone discovered evidence of financial fraud and extortion in their neighborhood, what would be the most ethical way to handle it?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Marcus, what exactly have you found?" Marcus showed her the printed bank statements and permit records. Sarah studied them with the same careful attention she'd give to a patient's test results. "This is criminal activity," she said finally. "You need to report this to the police. I'm gathering more evidence first. But Sarah, I need to know how many other neighbors has Karen pressured into paying these bogus fees." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, she came to me last year, said there had been complaints about my roses growing over the property. Line claimed I needed to pay for a vegetation management assessment or face city fines. How much? $300. I paid it because I was starting my practice and couldn't afford any legal complications." Sarah's voice carried a note of anger. "Are you telling me it was all fake?" "Every bit of it." "Sarah, would you be willing to make a statement about what happened?" "Absolutely." "And Marcus, ... I think I know other people she's targeted." Word spread quickly through a different network than Karen's usual information channels. Dr. Kim talked to her patients who lived in the neighborhood. Marcus reached out to former neighbors who'd moved away. Within 3 days, Marcus had statements from 11 different households describing Karen's various schemes. The pattern was always the same. Karen would identify a potential violation, file or threaten to file official complaints, then offer to resolve the issue in exchange for payment or services to the HOA. Neighbors paid because they feared legal consequences, damage to their credit, or simply wanted to avoid the hassle of fighting city bureaucracy. But Karen's most ambitious scheme was just coming to light. Marcus was reviewing property records when he noticed something strange about recent sales in Willowbrook Heights. Every house that sold in the past 2 years had been purchased by the same property management company, Sunrise Residential Holdings, LLC. He dug deeper and discovered that Sunrise Residential was buying homes in their neighborhood, doing minimal renovations, and then renting them out at premium rates to young professionals who wanted to live in an exclusive community, but couldn't afford to buy. The homes were being converted from owner-occupied residences to rental properties, fundamentally changing the character of the neighborhood. And according to state business records, Sunrise Residential Holdings, LLC, was owned by 2 individuals, Karen Elizabeth Whitmore and Dale Anthony Whitmore. Karen hadn't just been driving out her neighbors, she'd been buying their homes and converting them to rental income properties. Marcus leaned back in his chair, impressed despite himself. Karen's operation was more sophisticated than he'd realized. She was systematically transforming Willowbrook Heights from a community of homeowners to a collection of rental properties under her control. As landlord and HOA president, she'd have complete authority over the neighborhood. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic sort of way. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Rita's name appeared on the caller ID. "Marcus, You need to see this in person. Can you meet me downtown in an hour? What did you find? More than you bargained for. We're not just talking about neighborhood schemes anymore. Your HOA president has been very busy. An hour later, Marcus sat in Rita's downtown office, staring at a conference table covered with financial documents, photographs, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. Let's start with the basics, Rita said, settling into her chair. Karen Whitmore has been operating multiple interconnected schemes for at least 5 years. The HOA extortion was just the most visible part. Rita pointed to a flowchart she'd created, showing the connections between Karen's various businesses. She owns the property management company that's been buying houses in your neighborhood. She owns a cleaning service that's the exclusive contractor for all the rental people. Dale Whitmore sat in his rental car, outside a Starbucks 3 towns away from Willowbrook Heights. Reading the text message that had arrived 30 minutes before his scheduled flight home, the sender was listed simply as M. Chen, and the message was direct. We need to discuss your wife's business activities. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m., or I contact the FBI Monday morning. Dale's hand shook as he reread the message. For 2 years, he'd been dreading this moment, the day when Karen's schemes would finally catch up with their family. He'd tried to distance himself from her HOA activities, taking longer business trips and avoiding neighborhood events. But he'd never imagined someone would come after him directly. The smart thing would be to call Karen immediately, to warn her that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse. But Dale had been carrying secrets of his own, secrets that made this crisis both more complicated and potentially more devastating than Karen could imagine. He typed back a simple response: Maple Street Diner, 2 p.m. 24 hours later, Dale walked into the aging diner, scanning the sparse lunch crowd until he spotted Marcus Chen sitting in a corner booth, a manila folder and a tablet computer arranged neatly on the table in front of him. Dale had seen Marcus around the neighborhood but had never spoken to him directly. Karen had always handled neighbor relations. Mr. Whitmore, Marcus said as Dale slid into the opposite seat. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, Dale said, his voice tight with tension. What do you want? Marcus opened the folder and spread out a series of financial documents. I want to discuss your wife's criminal enterprise and your role in it. Dale studied the paper's bank statements, property records, business incorporation, documents. His throat went dry as he recognized the scope of what Marcus had uncovered. I don't know what you think you've found, Dale began, but Marcus cut him off. Your wife has been operating a sophisticated racketeering scheme for at least 5 years. She's committed fraud, extortion, tax evasion, and environmental crimes. The total damage to your neighbors exceeds $2 million. Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet on his tablet. But here's what interests me, Dale. According to these financial records, you've been listed as co-owner of multiple shell companies, signatory on numerous bank accounts, and co-applicant on property purchases. Legally speaking, you're equally liable for everything Karen has done. Dale's face went pale. I didn't know the details of what she was doing, but you knew something was wrong, Marcus pressed. Your household income, according to tax records, shouldn't support the lifestyle you've been living. The rental properties, the business investments, the cash transactions, you had to know the money was coming from somewhere. Dale was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread across the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've been trying to get away from her for 3 years. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Away from Karen. Away from all of it? The schemes, the manipulation, the constant drama? Dale looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time. Do you think I enjoyed watching my wife terrorize our neighbors? Do you think I was proud of what she was building? Then why didn't you stop her? Dale laughed bitterly. You clearly don't know Karen very well. She doesn't take no for an answer. She doesn't compromise. And she certainly doesn't let people walk away once they know her secrets. Marcus leaned forward, sensing there was more to Dale's story. What aren't you telling me? Dale hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Those business trips I've been taking. I wasn't traveling for work. I was meeting with divorce attorneys, forensic accountants, and financial advisors. I've been trying to figure out how to extricate myself from Karen's operation without ending up in prison. And what did they tell you? That I'm fucked. Dale's voice carried a note of dark humor. 20 years of marriage means I'm legally responsible for half of everything she's done. Community property laws work both ways. I get half the assets and half the liability. Marcus studied Dale's expression, looking for signs of deception. The man seemed genuinely distressed, but Marcus had investigated enough financial crimes to know that seeming innocent was often its own kind of skill. Dale, I'm going to ask you directly, have you been actively participating in Karen's schemes, or have you been a passive victim? A little of both, Dale admitted. When she first started the HOA president thing, I thought it was harmless. Community involvement, you know, making the neighborhood nicer. But then she started coming home with cash from pool fees and special assessments. When I asked questions, she'd get defensive and tell me to mind my own business. When did you realize it had gone beyond normal HOA activities? 2 years ago, when she wanted me to co-sign on the purchase of the Hendersons' house? She said it was an investment opportunity, that we could fix it up and flip it for a profit. But Marcus? The Hendersons had been our friends. I'd watched Karen make their lives miserable with bogus violations until they felt like they had no choice but to sell. Dale pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a series of text messages. Look at these. This is Karen coordinating with code enforcement officers, scheduling inspections, timing complaints for maximum impact. She was orchestrating a campaign to drive out our neighbors so she could buy their homes below market value. Marcus scrolled through the messages, his anger building with each manipulative exchange. Karen had been treating her neighbors like pieces on a chessboard, moving them around to serve her financial interests. Why didn't you go to the police then? Marcus asked. Because I was already in too deep, Dale said. My name was on the business accounts. I'd signed loan documents. Legally speaking, I was her partner, whether I wanted to be or not. And Karen made it very clear that if I tried to expose her, I'd go down with her. What did she threaten you? With Dale's expression darkened. She said she'd tell everyone that the whole operation was my idea, that she was just the front person while I was the mastermind behind the scenes. She had forged documents, fake email chains, even recordings of conversations where she'd manipulated me into saying things that could be taken out of context. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Karen's talent for manipulation extended beyond her neighbors. She'd been controlling and blackmailing her own husband for years. Dale, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to testify against Karen if this goes to criminal trial? Dale stared at the table for a long moment. Will it help me avoid prison? Possibly. If you cooperate fully, provide all the evidence you have, and demonstrate that you were coerced rather than complicit, prosecutors might offer you immunity in exchange for your testimony. And if I don't cooperate, Marcus closed the folder with a definitive snap. Then I turn all of this evidence over to the FBI on Monday morning, and you face the same charges as Karen: conspiracy, racketeering, tax evasion, environmental crimes. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Dale closed his eyes, the weight of his situation finally settling on him completely. What do you want me to do? First, I want you to go home and act normal. Don't let Karen know we've spoken. Second, I want you to gather every document, recording, and piece of evidence you have about her operations. Third, I want you to be ready to make a choice. What choice? Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Tomorrow night, I'm going to confront Karen with everything I've found. I'm going to offer her a chance to shut down her operations voluntarily and make restitution to the community. If she agrees, this stays private and no one goes to prison. And if she refuses, then this becomes a federal case, and everyone involved faces the consequences, including you. Dale nodded slowly. She won't agree. Karen doesn't surrender. She doubles down. She escalates. It's what she does. Then you need to decide whether you're going down with her or if you're finally ready to save yourself. After Dale left the diner, Marcus sat alone for another hour, processing what he'd learned. Karen's operation was even more sinister than he'd realized. She'd been manipulating not just her neighbors, but her own family. Dale was as much a victim as anyone else, trapped in a marriage that had become a criminal conspiracy, but Dale's willingness to cooperate gave Marcus leverage he hadn't expected. If Karen knew that her husband was ready to testify against her, it might be enough to force her into accepting a negotiated settlement, or it might drive her to do something desperate and dangerous. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Rita. Change of plans, he said when she answered. I want to move up the timeline. Can you be ready to present everything to the FBI by Monday morning, if necessary? What happened? Karen's husband is ready to flip, but that means she's going to realize her world is collapsing faster than we anticipated. If she decides to run, or if she tries to destroy evidence, we need to be ready to move immediately. Marcus, are you sure you want to confront her directly? People like Karen can be unpredictable when they're cornered. Marcus looked out the diner window at the quiet suburban street, thinking about his peaceful retirement that had been shattered by one woman's greed and manipulation. Rita, I've spent my entire career dealing with criminals who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Karen Whitmore may be ruthless, but she's not nearly as cleave. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill, as if the weather itself sensed the confrontation brewing in Willowbrook Heights. Karen Whitmore stood in her living room, arranging chairs for what she'd announced as an emergency community safety meeting to address ongoing harassment by a hostile neighbor. She'd spent the day making calls, sending texts, and posting urgent messages on the neighborhood Facebook page. Her narrative was carefully crafted. Marcus Chen was a dangerous individual who was filing false reports, intimidating longtime residents, and threatening the safety and property values of their exclusive community. By 7 p.m., Karen's living room was packed with 16 neighbors, all of whom looked uncomfortable and uncertain. The mood was different from previous meetings, less supportive, more skeptical. Several residents kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting Marcus to appear at any moment. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Karen began, taking her position at the front of the room. She wore her most authoritative outfit, a charcoal business suit with her HOA president pin prominently displayed. We have a situation that threatens the safety and stability of our community. Dale sat in the back corner, trying to appear supportive, while his stomach churned with anxiety. At any moment, Marcus Chen could knock on the door with enough evidence to destroy everything. And Karen, in her delusional confidence, was walking deeper into a trap with every word. As you all know, Karen continued, Marcus Chen has been waging a campaign of harassment against multiple residents. He's filed false reports with city inspectors, attempted to intimidate families with children, and shown a pattern of hostile behavior that's completely unacceptable in a community like ours. Janet Kowalski raised her hand. Karen, what specifically do you want us to do? I mean, if he owns his property? Janet, this isn't about property rights. This is about community standards and safety. Karen pulled out a folder of documents she'd prepared. I've been researching legal options available to HOAs when dealing with disruptive residents. We have more power than most people realize. She began distributing copies of what appeared to be legal precedents and HOA enforcement procedures. We can fine residents for violations of community standards. We can restrict access to common areas. We can even initiate legal proceedings to force the sale of properties owned by residents who refuse to comply with neighborhood covenants. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had been silent up to this point, spoke up from the middle of the room. Karen, you suggesting we try to force Marcus to sell his house? I'm suggesting we protect our community from someone who's clearly hostile to our established way of life. Karen replied smoothly. Marcus Chen moved into our neighborhood and immediately began challenging traditions that have served us well for decades. Like the pool that was on his property? Asked Bob Patterson. Karen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Bob, that pool had been used by the community for years. Any reasonable person would have worked with neighbors to find a solution that benefited everyone. Instead, Mr. Chen chose the most destructive option possible. But it was his pool, Dr. Kim pressed. On his land, doesn't he have the right to remove it? Legal technicalities aside, Karen said, her voice carrying a warning edge. The real issue is the pattern of behavior. The pool was just the beginning. Since then, he's filed frivolous complaints, attempted to intimidate residents, and created an atmosphere of conflict that's damaging to everyone's property values. As Karen spoke, Dale noticed something troubling in her presentation. She was no longer just manipulating facts, she was beginning to believe her own lies. The cognitive dissonance had reached a critical point where Karen genuinely saw herself as the victim in this situation. What I'm proposing, Karen continued, is that we vote to impose significant fines on Mr. Chen for violations of community harmony standards. We'll also vote to restrict his access to common areas and initiate a formal complaint with the city about his harassment of neighbors. How much in fines? Asked Mrs. Henderson. $5,000 per incident of disruptive behavior. And I've documented at least 6 incidents in the past month. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Even Karen's most loyal supporters seemed shocked by the aggressive escalation she was proposing. Dale watched his wife with growing horror. She wasn't just trying to intimidate Marcus anymore, she was trying to financially destroy him. And worse, she was trying to drag the entire neighborhood into her criminal conspiracy. That's when the doorbell rang. Karen's expression shifted from confident to wary. Dale, can you see who that is? Dale stood up, knowing exactly who would be on the other side of the door. I'll handle it. But before Dale could reach the door, it opened to reveal Marcus Chen, accompanied by a woman in a professional suit carrying a briefcase and a man in a police uniform. Good evening, everyone, Marcus said calmly, surveying the room full of surprised neighbors. I apologize for interrupting your meeting, but I believe we have some important matters to discuss. Karen's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally a cold calculation. This is private property, Mr. Chen. You're trespassing. Actually, your husband invited me, Marcus replied, looking directly at Dale. Didn't you, Dale? All eyes turned to Dale, who stood frozen in the middle of the room. Karen's expression transformed into something genuinely dangerous as she realized what was happening. Dale, Karen's voice was barely controlled. What is he talking about? The woman with the briefcase stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Rita Vasquez, a licensed private investigator. Mr. Chen has retained me to investigate certain irregularities in HOA, financial management, and neighborhood property transactions. I don't have to listen to this, Karen snapped. Officer, I want these people removed from my property immediately. The police officer, whose nameplate read Rodriguez, consulted a folder in his hand. Ma'am, I'm here to serve you with a warrant for financial records related to an ongoing investigation into fraud, racketeering, and tax evasion. The room fell silent. Several neighbors began edging toward the door, sensing that they'd wandered into something far more serious than a neighborhood dispute. Marcus stepped into the center of the room, his voice calm but carrying complete authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you all deserve to know what's really been happening in your community. He gestured to Rita, who opened her briefcase, and began distributing copies of documents to the stunned neighbors. For the past 5 years, Marcus continued, Karen Whitmore has been operating a criminal enterprise disguised as HOA management. She's been extorting money from residents, filing false code enforcement complaints, and systematically driving families out of the neighborhood so she could purchase their homes below market value. Karen found her voice. This is harassment. This is a coordinated attack by someone who's trying to destroy our community. The total amount stolen from HOA funds exceeds $47,000, Rita announced, consulting her tablet. Mrs. Whitmore has been paying herself through shell companies for services that were never provided. She's also been collecting fees for pool access and community improvements that were never authorized by the HOA board. Dr. Kim looked up from the documents she'd been studying. Karen, is this true? Did you charge us for pool access to someone else's pool? Sarah, don't let them manipulate you, Karen said desperately. This is exactly what I was warning you about. Marcus Chen is trying to turn us against each other, but the evidence was overwhelming. Rita had prepared individual packets for each household, showing exactly how much money they'd paid in bogus fees, how their personal information had been used to target them for harassment, and how their neighborhood had been converted from a community of homeowners to a collection of rental properties under Karen's control. Bob Patterson stood up, his face red with anger. Karen, you charged my family $300 for a landscape violation assessment that never happened. You made my wife cry because she thought we were going to lose our house over the height of our hedges. And you bought the Hendersons' house after making their lives miserable for months, added Janet Kowalski, her voice carrying a note of betrayal. I helped you torment my neighbors, and you were profiting from it the entire time. Karen looked around the room, seeing her carefully constructed support network crumbling in real time. The neighbors she'd manipulated for years were finally seeing her for what she really was. Dale, she said, turning to her husband with desperation in her voice. Tell them this is all lies. Tell them we've been working together to improve the community. Dale looked at his wife, this woman he'd lived with for 20 years, and realized he was finally free to tell the truth. Karen, he said quietly, it's over. What do you mean it's over? Karen's voice was rising toward hysteria. Dale pulled out his phone and handed it to Officer Rodriguez. I've been recording conversations with my wife for the past 6 months. Everything is documented, the threats, the manipulation, the planning. I have evidence of everything she's done. Karen stared at Dale as if seeing him for the first time. Why oh you've been working with them. I've been trying to save us both, Dale replied, but you wouldn't stop. You couldn't stop, and now it's too late. Marcus